Hello everyone, it's Joe aka Concrete Dog here, and hopefully this is the first in a series of videos I'm going to do about rocketry stuff. Today we're just going to focus on model rockets, which is exactly where you want to start, even if you aspire to build some really big high power stuff that's taller than you are, and that kind of thing. The stuff you learn with model rockets all kind of carries through. It's all really valuable, and it's a great place to start. And in fact, the place to start with it is to start with a kit build. So I've got a few rockets here. A couple of them are scratch built. This is kind of a kit built, but I've modified it slightly. But these two here, this larger one and this orange one at the front, they are kit built, and they are a kit that I recommend because you can actually buy this rocket and all the launch gear for them in a package called the Tandem X package by Estes. It's about £30, and for my mind, I'm not on commission or anything, but for my mind it's one of the best starter packs that there is, because it gives you all the launch equipment that you can use again and again and again with model rockets. All of these rockets could be launched off the launch stuff that came with that kit, and it gives you two rockets and it gives you a good start. So this larger one actually is really easy to build because it's literally, the fins are plastic, the fin can is plastic, the motor mount is just screws on. It's two cardboard tubes and a nose cone. You can glue that together in about 10 minutes and then maybe wait another hour for all the glue to dry, stick the sticker on, and you're ready to kind of fly. And it flies beautifully. The other one that we get in the pack is this one, which is an Estes Crossfire, and this is a kind of classic. This is a really good classic Estes design. It's a bit more work to build this because it's got balsa wood fins, and it's also got these little extra sort of finlets as part of the design. So it needs a little bit more cutting out, a little bit more sanding down, gluing, attaching fins, getting fins. You have to learn how to get fins on accurately and vertically and things like that, which is stuff that you don't have to do with this because it's all got sort of pockets for all the fins to go into. But they're really great, and it's where I would start. So let's use the Estes Crossfire as our example, and I'll talk through the various parts. This is going to be really obvious, but it's important to have this basic sort of anatomy down. So I tend to, and a lot of people tend to call the whole thing the rocket airframe. So the airframe is the kind of the whole thing. First thing we'll look at is the nose cone. So nose cones, you can see just from the examples I've got here, there's loads of different kind of shapes and profiles of nose cone. And indeed, the nose cone's job basically is to kind of make the airframe as aerodynamic as possible, to split the atmosphere around the airframe, to make the sort of atmosphere flow over it as smoothly as possible, to maximise the speed and the height to which our model rocket can fly. Commonly now they're made out of, like this one is made out of plastic that's been, I would imagine, I think this has been injection moulded. Some of them are vacuum formed. The traditional, more traditional nose cones, one of which I can't see to hand at the moment, but they're made out of balsa wood, but they're a solid piece of balsa wood. And of course I'm using 3D printing to make nose cones. 3D printing is a really useful tool in the rocketry scratch building arsenal. Particularly that's quite a difficult shape to make. Incidentally, this rocket is the Imp rocket, which I scratch built, I designed and simulated and built and flew, and it currently holds the UK altitude record for A-impulse motors, which are the tiniest little rocket motors that you can get. And yeah, so back to this. So we've got that's the nose cone. We've got some fins. We'll talk about fins in a minute. We've got the body tube. So the body tube is the outer tube of that forms the rocket airframe. In low power rocketry, in fact, every rocket here is made out of cardboard. The Estes rocket cardboard kind of has like a sort of plasticized kind of feel to it. It's probably got some plastic coating that kind of makes it a little bit tougher, but it's true to say if you squoze that hard in your hand you would crush it like a cardboard tube. This rocket is a special one to me. It's a bit scruffy there, but it's the first one that I designed and scratch built and flew successfully. That was my own design, but it's simply made, it's been painted badly, but it's just made out of a cardboard tube out of some Christmas wrapping paper, if I recall. So they really are just cardboard tubes. So attached to the body tube are usually some fins. Fins can be made out of plastic, but more commonly in the smaller stuff they're made out of balsa wood, as I said. As you get a little bit larger, these ones are made out of very thin 3mm plywood. As you move into mid-power and high power, they might even be coated with fiberglass. They may be made entirely out of fiberglass or even posh things like carbon fiber, etc. Fins are really important. They make it look like a rocket for a start, but also fins are really important because they add stability to the rocket. I'm not going to go into stability too much, but basically we have the centre of gravity of the rocket is marked here, so it's where, if it had everything in it and a motor, where it would kind of balance, the point at which it would balance. And then this other thing is called the centre of pressure. And it's important that the centre of pressure, don't worry if you don't understand what that means, but it's important to know that that should be behind the centre of gravity to make it stable and want to fly vertically upwards. If it was on the other side of the centre of gravity, it would want to spin or fly downwards, which is not good. The way to move this backwards is to increase the fill size. So if I made the fills on this bigger, this point would move backwards and it would be more stable. You actually don't want them overstable, but as I say, we'll talk about that in another video. If this rocket just had tiny little fins like this would be over here and it wouldn't work as a rocket. So there we go, that's pretty much the outer main components. The other thing we've got on most of these little rockets is a launch lug, which is just a separate little tube that's mounted on, and that's to help the rocket start off. When you launch it, it would be, if I can get this in here, it would be, obviously this would be vertical, but the launch assembly is a rail, a metal rail, and the lug just kind of keeps it on the rail, and it means that as it accelerates and comes up to speed, it's held and supported so that it stays vertical. Then once it leaves the rail, it should be going fast enough to stay vertical. So that's that. Let's look at the motors. So the motors obviously go in the back. So this rocket has a smaller tube inside, and that's quite common. Not always. Sometimes we build rockets that have motors that just go straight into the body tube. In fact, this rocket is like that. You can see that the motor is exactly the kind of diameter of the inside of the rocket airframe. On this one though, the rocket airframe, the body tube is wider than the motor. So I'll show you using this what that's like inside in a second. But in this model, we insert the motor past this metal clip, which is there to kind of lock it in place and stop it from going back out. And there's also inside the tube that's inside, there's a little disc in the top of the tube that stops the motor from travelling this way too far in the tube. That's important because if you lit this motor and there was nothing stopping it at that end of the tube, it would probably rip all the way through your motor, your rocket, and come out of this end, or perhaps blow it to pieces inside, which is not good, not what we're aiming for. Although it does happen, hence why you should always follow the instructions and use your correct safety distances when you're launching things. So we've got our motor in. This is actually a used motor that I've just kept for example. We would put it on the vertical rail of the pad, and then we would insert one of these, which is a little igniter. The igniter is like a kind of, the simplest way to think of it is an electric match, and we would attach to the wires at the back the launch equipment, which is a little controller that contains some batteries and a couple of switches. Once that's in there, we would just plug and hold it in place using one of these tiny little plastic plugs which they supply with the motor. And then we would retire to a safe distance and press we need to insert a safety key and then press the button once we'd made sure that everything was clear and that we were happy with everything. And hopefully our motor would ignite, blow out the igniter and the little plug, and it would set off up the rail and off up into the sky very quickly, hopefully. So just quickly, how it works once it's in flight is the motor burns, pushing gas out. The gas comes out really, really fast, which creates the thrust, which pushes the rocket up. The motor burns the fuel, and when the fuel runs out, the rocket doesn't stop. It keeps going with its own momentum, flies up, and keeps, and we call that the coasting section. So it coasts up to the height that it's going to attain. When it runs out of energy at the top, it's going to stop for a moment, and then it's going to start to fall back down to Earth. When it's at the top, we call that bit apogee, when it's at that moment where it's stopped. Shortly after apogee, interestingly, what's been going on while it's been coasting is the motor has been sort of burning slightly inside, but not producing any gas. And it's actually burning a slow sort of fuse for a few seconds. And once that fuse has run out, it reaches a little well at the top of the motor, which is sort of plugged, but plugged only quite gently. And it's got some loose explosives in it, some loose black powder in it, which explodes with a sort of a great big poof. But so it kind of produces a lot of gas, but it isn't a violent burn that produces thrust. That puff goes this way into the rocket airframe, and that bunch of gas getting kind of exploded into the airframe causes the nose cone to get pushed off, and everything that's inside the airframe to get pushed out. So you can see here the nose cone has come out, it's got some strings attached to it, and it's also got this piece of elastic. And if I keep pulling it, we'll see that this bundled up thing that's coming out, this is actually a parachute, and the elastic bit is attached to the inside of the rocket airframe. So the nose cone would kind of move away, the parachute would hopefully undo, this would hang, the rest of the body of the rocket would hang off the elastic, and it would slowly coast back down to ground. And there we go. That's pretty much how a flight would work. Just before we go, just to show you what's going on inside here, this is obviously a bigger one for a bigger rocket, but this is the motor mount tube. It's got two centering rings. This is an Estes one that's come out of a kit that I use to talk about in workshops. But for example, in my scratch built one, I've cut on my CNC router, but you could do it by hand as well. I've cut some thin plywood centering rings to work with the tubes that I've got. It's got, I don't know if you can see it, it's got the kind of blocking ring inside to stop the motor from travelling up this way, and we can see how this has been mounted. It's kind of got a bit of glue in it there, and then this ring basically just makes that spring a little bit rather than pivoting right off. And so that's kind of what's going on inside the motor mount assembly. There we go. The only thing that my rocket didn't have in it was a little bit of this wadding, which is special fireproof wadding, which you put in first underneath the parachute to protect the parachute from getting burnt. So all of this should be reusable, and you can use it again and again until you run out of motors or it starts to rain. There we go. Thank you very much for watching. If you like this, do hit the like button and feel free to subscribe. Take care. Bye.